almost ready. For those on TikTok, go ahead, tap the screen, share the live, and we're going to get started. Looks like we are live now. Welcome. All right, welcome everyone. So tonight's topic, we're going to talk about chameleon survival mechanisms and how they pertain to abuse and being able to identify the different masks that we use and how that impacts us, how that impacts other people, and also how that can not only it can be a positive, but it can also be a negative, and understanding uh, which one is which. So that's what we're going to dive deep into tonight. So stick around. If you're on TikTok, go ahead, tap the screen, share the live, show some love, some energy. If you have comments, questions, feel free to put those in the chat. If you're on Facebook, type in hashtag live if you're watching live so that I know that you're here. If you are watching the replay, type in hashtag replay and we'll catch up on that. So if this is your first time joining me, my name is Tina. I'm a happiness coach. I help people move from being in a dark, depressed, anxious kind of state, dealing with those challenging emotions, to moving to a happier place. And I do this by sharing my experience, strength, and hope of the things that have actually worked for me. I'm a trauma survivor, experienced sexual abuse, multiple abusers, also violence, neglect, a whole bunch of different things growing up. And most of the time, up until recently, I didn't really talk about that very much. I didn't want to be identified as a survivor, even though I just didn't want to be seen as somebody who had been victimized. And I went out of my way to prove that I was fine. Even fought going to therapy back when I was like 19 or so, because I wanted to prove that it didn't affect me. What had happened didn't have any impact on me. And I went through many, many years of therapy, recovery, group therapy, all different kinds of things. And I had always been willing to talk and open up with people if it was more of a one-on-one kind of situation. And then I was fine with being able to share that. But in 2021, I decided that I wanted to have a bigger impact. And I started a coaching program to help closers heal past trauma. And so in my endeavors to make sure that I didn't make mistakes and I, had some sort of backing of the things, because I was sharing from my own personal experience, which was more than enough when I was helping people one-on-one. But when I decided I wanted to be a coach, I started doing research. And when I did some research, that's when I realized, oh, damn, I actually had some more work to do, because my initial therapy focused mainly on dealing with the aspects of the sexual abuse, and it didn't really start getting into any of the dynamics of the neglect, the different attachment styles, any of those kind of things. It didn't really deal with that, and it didn't really touch on how that was impacting me in my business life, different reactions I had for different things, right? So tonight we're going to be going through different things of some of the adaptive measures that survivors often develop as ways of coping with the situations that they're going through. People pleasing tends to be one of the ones. Now, you can also go on either side of the spectrum. You could side a little bit more with the aggressor, the abuser, of developing certain ways of behaving so that you don't have to deal with it. And they're all protection mechanisms, so they're not, one is not any better than the other, and all can be healed. So, as we're going through this, so somebody might learn that lying and manipulating and all those kind of things is advantageous, and it was a survival tool for them growing up. Um, my brother and I, we often would we play we played board games together, and he tended to be a little bit better. I can't lie to save my life. I'm not very good at it. um, so he was much better at that kind of stuff, but then I'd always catch him cheating when we were playing Monopoly, and then I turned into like this whole hall monitor, and it usually ended up into this like big fight, and the board got flipped, and all that kind of stuff would end up happening, and that was just how we ended up dealing with certain things. My brother was better at getting people to do the things that he wanted to, where I was a little bit more on the side of, fuck you, I don't need anybody, I'm going to go do this myself, right? So there's different styles of being able to cope with the strategies, but they are all a matter, the what side of the fence we end up landing on depends on how effective those strategies were for us. So, and we learn these different adaptive styles, right? Of um, being a bit like a chameleon, and whatever, because we're so externally focused, and trauma in and of itself causes you to be externally focused. You have to be on high alert because you never know what's going to come next, right? You don't know, is the fight going to break out, and you're going to have to jump in and break up the fight. Are you going to have to worry about guns coming out? Are you going to have to worry about, are you going to get a good sleep tonight because he's going to come into the room and do things, right? So there were all these different things that would end up happening that cause you to start to become externally focused, on high alert, hyper vigilant about what's going to happen next. And in efforts to try and mitigate those challenges, we become adaptive to um, being able to read the room, being able to read other people's energy, their expressions, their tone, all of this kind of stuff, because we're trying to anticipate, how is tonight going to go? Like when they come home, I've heard of some people talking about how just the way the key turned in the door, they knew whether or not their parent or whatever was coming home in a good mood or bad mood. And sometimes I know one of the coping mechanisms that I developed, which isn't, they're not all bad coping strategies, but one is I became the comedian. So I found that if I could make them laugh, then the night was a lot better. I also learned how to diffuse the problem by being able to explain, well, this is what mom really meant, and this is what, the abuser really meant, and, try to find some sort of middle ground. Turns out those are pretty good negotiating skills. However, I was negotiating on a daily basis at a young age, and it wasn't so much like a conscious thing. It was just more trying to prevent the fights from happening, trying to prevent the drama from happening. So you learn to wear many different masks, right? Depending on which group that you are in. And because you become so externally focused, you don't develop a strong sense of identity. You end up having these very flexible boundaries, or at least I did. Now, on the flip side, my brother had a lot more rigid boundaries. He was very strict. He was very particular about how his stuff was taken care of, and all of those kind of things. And like I said, it's not wrong either way, but it was it's all in our ability to have some sort of sense of control over the situation. So my brother leaned more towards structure. I leaned more towards flexibility, because I found that if I was adaptable then and agreeable, then it didn't matter. It was all a matter of control. Whereas my brother, whereas if he was strict and he was very structured in how he approached things, how he kept things, and if he snapped at somebody first, that kept them under control, that they would do what he wanted. Whereas I kind of went the other way. And these are all different ways that you end up finding how to cope with the situation that you're growing up in. And it's all about managing the fear, managing the the emotional reactions of those around us, and it's all about trying to protect ourselves rather than truly understanding, is this me or is this somebody that I've had to become in order to survive, right? And starting to learn those different ways. When I was first in therapy, I was actually in a group therapy setting, and we did this mask exercise where we had to do like this whole plaster of Paris kind of mask on our face, and then we had to decorate it in ways of what do we show the outside world, and then what's going on behind the mask, and really understanding what's going on there. So when I started to do that kind of stuff, I portrayed, the smart kid, the level-headed kid, the one that doesn't cause any problems, is easygoing. All of that kind of stuff is the stuff that I portrayed on the outside. However, what was going on in the inside was a bunch of anxiety and angry emotions and stuff like that that I hid from the world, and becoming aware of that and why I hid that, because as I was doing it, I actually had many layers that were going on behind the mask of all these different emotions that I didn't feel like I was allowed to express in the environments that I was growing up in. I wasn't allowed to express anger. I wasn't allowed to express different opinions or anything else like that. It's just more conform, because anytime I did try to speak up, I was punished for those kind of things. I was told that I talked back, all of those kind of things. So consequently, I learned not to speak up very much for myself and just kind of go along with things. And that works for a certain amount of time until I ended up getting into entrepreneurship. And now you don't have a boss telling you what to do. You don't have somebody else saying, well, I don't have somebody else to people please for. Now I have to do this for myself? What? Wait, what? No, I don't understand this. This is just crazy, because every time you try to go do something for yourself, you end up feeling selfish. You feel like all of the negative criticism that you grew up with starts coming back. Who do you think you are? All of these kind of things, right? Oh, you think you're so smart. All of those negative criticisms that you've experienced through your life, whether that as a child or as an adult, whatever it is, these negative voices come back and try to get you to change back to the old way of behaving. So all of these things that we start to do now, people can find this pretty off-putting, right? So if you see me in a more social environment, I'm laid back, easygoing, funny, like, I'm good for whatever, right? Put me in a work environment where I have certain KPIs, I have tasks, I have goals that I'm supposed to achieve, and then this little bit more aggressive, okay, probably a lot more aggressive side comes out of me. And I know, when I was working with people, they got to know me in a certain environment, and when we ended up working together too, they saw this switch flip. And it's not because that's not who I am. It is. Um, it's just this different environment, and where I see myself, and how, and the work environments that I also grew up in. I grew up in very competitive work environments that transport and logistics and third party logistics. So if our customers could actually do a better job than us, then our customers were our greatest competition. So it's like you have to like walk this fine line, right? So you have to be able to provide them that service and do it better than they can, but they're also at the same time always looking to see, well, can we actually do it cheaper? Like, do we really need these guys? And so there's always this whole competitive edge, even with your own customers, let alone the other logistics companies that are out there. So there's those kind of things that end up happening. So you start to develop these different ways of behaving. And so, like I said, I grew up in those. I started in transport and logistics when I was 17, and I worked in that for like 30 years. And so, in various like really high end companies too. So, you don't get to the top, you don't get to being the best in the industry without being competitive in some ways. And so, yet at the same time, I'm fine with being competitive towards the goal, not competitive towards other people, though. There's certain ways that I'll behave. It's like I'll draw the line. It's like if I have to walk over this person, then I'm not going to do that. However, I will make sure that the job's done, and it's more, this isn't personal, this is business. So I've done those kind of things. It also sucks to be on the receiving end. So learning these different techniques, learning the different masks that we wear, or hats, and just we adapt in different situations, right? Of how we need to be, right? You can't. Um, and that can be shocking for some people to be able to see you in a different light. No different than, say, the CEO of the company, right? You know, the VPs and all those kind of things. There have been be times that like you see them in the office, you see them in this particular setting, and you expect them to behave in certain ways. And then we'd have like a company picnic where, you know, there was you know, you get to wear blue jeans and t-shirts, and you'd see them with their wife or their husband and their kids, and you know, maybe they are, you know, having a drink or something like that too, that you normally don't get to see them in that light. And it's like, and they behave differently when their spouse is around as to when they are in the office. Does that mean that they're switching up? No, there's different environments, different people that we're around, that we learn adaptive behaviors. And so I don't necessarily think that um, being able to change and change your colors like a chameleon is a bad thing. It is more the intent that goes behind it, right? Of why are you doing it? Now, are you doing it because you're fitting in with the crowd and you're just trying to people please? Or is, no, this is a more relaxed environment and I'm okay with letting my guard down. I feel comfortable with these people. Or no, this is a business environment. We have certain things that we need to get done, right? So, so for example, excuse me. So I tend to be somebody who, on one hand, I'm not very structured, right? On another hand, I can be extremely structured. So it depends on the situation and what's going on. So I'm not very big on, you know, somebody that is to the minute on time if it's just up to me. If I don't see an urgent need, then I have a lot of flexibility around time. However, in certain situations, I know that there's a certain deadline, there's other people that are depending on me for a particular outcome. Um, we have limited resources. We have time constraints of when this thing is going to, like when this project is going to kick off or needs to be met. There's multiple people involved. So if it's not just me, then I will definitely be a lot more structured in my approach. Budget constraints as well, right? When you only have a limited amount of resources, then you focus on maximizing. So I tend very much to implement a lot of structure, and throughout my career, I've written a lot of SOPs. And I've been the one that implements structure, which is quite funny because I also tend to be the one that resists structure the most. So I'm great at implementation of structure, not so great at following and being consistent with following it. Now, I can be consistent and I can put good structures in place. So, for example, this one time we were planning a trip, and it was kind of like a road trip, and we were looking at all these different. Well, I say we, but I did all of the planning for the entire trip, and because it was a road trip, I had to calculate how long we were going to drive, and I was going to be doing most of the driving. How long we were going to drive, where we were going to stop, what sites we were going to see, how much of the budget constraints. And I had all of these things, and I had this entire spreadsheet done up. And I calculated with time. I looked up reviews at different hotels and what kind of things were in the environment. So I did a whole lot of research and I structured this all out and I calculated mileage and how far we were going to drive and timing and, factoring in like pit stops and all those kind of things. And to kick off our trip, we actually tied it into meeting up with my brother and his partner and my mom and it was my husband and I at the time. So we were going on this whole um, little adventure kind of thing and kicked it off with them as part of our Thanksgiving because the Canadian Thanksgiving was in October. And so because we were going to be away for Thanksgiving, we had it early and we connected with them. We went to this really nice bed and breakfast place, and they had like a fancy little dinner area and fancy drinks and cocktails. It was really nice that we went there. And then the next day we went for a boat cruise in the Thousand Island areas, and we went to Bolt Castle. If you haven't been there, I highly recommend it. It was a great little visit, a nice history with it. And it's a little bit of a sad love story too. So it kind of broke my heart because this guy, he had gone through all of this trouble and he had bought this piece of land and he was building this castle on it for the love of his life. And he really loved her and he was doing this as a bit of a surprise kind of thing, and it was a long time doing the construction and he was putting everything that she wanted into it. And the thing is unfortunately she ended up passing away before the property was finished, and it's just so heartbreaking to see that. But when you go in, you get to see all the different aspects and all the detail and everything that they had put into it. And then, of course, the historical society that refinished the property and was doing the touch-ups and everything. It was just a really beautiful visit, and I love doing those kind of things where you start to you get a guided tour of what's going on with those kind of things. And that was kind of how we kicked off our trip. And then afterwards, it was just my husband and I, and we went to Salem and everything. But these there's different, so one of the things that I had learned, so I don't know if it's because of the trauma or if it is because of just being sensitive in nature. I'm not sure if it's a nature or a nurture kind of situation here, maybe a little of both. But all I know is that I tend to pick up energies, and I also pick up energies from physical locations. And it wasn't till I went on this actual trip that I started to become aware of the physical energies that I pick up from actual environments. And and some of this could be a trauma response too, because I was always very good at being able to pick up the energy of how things were going to go. Were things going to turn bad? And I would jump in and I would do some sort of comic relief, some sort of stress relief to prevent things from escalating. But I was always able to pick up energy. So when we went to Bolt Castle, though, I also picked up that energy from that place of just sad that, you know, he wasn't able to finish that project before she passed away. And it was just such a beautiful property, everything. And then we moved on to a bunch of different places that we stayed at, and we basically stayed at a different either bed and breakfast or hotel along the way. And so we got to experience quite a few different really good things. And we were following this really structured, detailed plan of exactly how, where we were going, where we were going to eat, all of these kind of things. I had everything all mapped out. And when we got to Salem, though, Salem had a very, very repressed energy, and I just felt so much sadness there. It was sadness and anger, right? So it really, and it, when we went on the different tours, it also turned out it wasn't what I thought it was all about. I thought it was about, witches and religion and all that kind of stuff. And when I found out it's more about, it was like a moneyed land grab, and it was like, and then they use this other stuff as like a cover for it. I was like, oh, that really sucks, right? Um, but by the time it was the very last day, the energy that I had picked up along the way, it got to the point where I was like, it was like three or four in the morning, and I said to my husband, I'm like, I want to go now. Like, let's pack everything up. We headed out. We hadn't had any sleep. We drove. It was at least 8 hours to our next one that we were driving to Terrytown. And I definitely love the Terrytown energy so much better. But I remember feeling like this oppressed energy in that environment. And it wasn't till we actually crossed the state line that I finally felt like it lift, that it severed the tie that it had. It was a very, very strange feeling. Um, and I'm probably not likely to go back there anytime soon. Um, and it was really sad because when we went to we went to one of the tours, it took us like to the coastline where, um, and it's actually a very beautiful area. But the energy from the people, it's kind of like they're dependent on the tourism to come to the town. However, they're also resentful of this negative energy just kept getting replayed over and over and over again, and that's their identity, right? So sometimes I think it's good to be able to change and be a chameleon and not have to go through, well, you're always this way and you have to be this way, right? So being able to change that identity is something that is important as you go through life, and there's various stages that you'll go through. Um, so what I think is important when you're dealing with identifying, am I doing this as a people pleasing? Is this really who I am? Or I think a better question is understanding why you are doing the things that you're doing, right? So, for instance, um, there will be times that I'll go through things where I'll be really structured and routine on something, and then I will actually deliberately break it to pay attention to the emotions that come up for me. Of and that is usually a good indicator, because here's why I do this is I do this because I tend to slip into doing things that and I'm picking up on other people's energy. So if I am picking up on other people's energy that they like a particular thing, I tend to like it as well. Why? Because I tend to go along rather than fight things. And whether that's a people pleasing thing or just a coping strategy or what. So sometimes I'll go along because A, it makes sense, and B, um, I don't really have an opinion either way about it. So somebody says try this, and I'll be like, okay, I'll go ahead and try this. And if it works, then I continue it. If it doesn't, then I may change it. But if I've been going along fairly consistently with something, um, and sometimes what I'll do is I'll deliberately break the routine to see, am I doing this just because I think somebody else wants me to do this? Or am I doing this because this is something that I truly want to do? And that has been a good tool for me to be able to understand, because when I break that routine, if I'm okay and I stay calm, then I know that this is something that I want to do. This is something that it it's in alignment with me and what it is that I want to do. If I break that routine and I start to feel a whole bunch of anxiety and I'm feeling anxious and worried of when am I going to get in trouble, that kind of feeling, then I know that I'm doing this more for a people pleasing reason rather than something that is truly authentic and aligned with me. So sometimes that is a good reason to break your structures, break your routines, and understand, especially if you kind of lean a bit more towards the people pleasing side, right? If you don't lean towards the people pleasing side and you tend to be more structured, more disciplined, more, okay, somebody said do this, I'm just going to do this, it works, da 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 da, right? Um, Being able to break that routine is a good way to test to see if there's any other creative ways that you can improve upon it. So there's those kind of things that you can kind of add to that. And then taking that step back by breaking that routine is enough to be able to kind of start to look at, is there a better way? Hey, Peter, good to see you. Welcome. Um, is there a better way for me to be able to actually do this? Is there um, something more creative that I can add to it rather than just, hey, we do this process, this is proven process, just follow this proven process and don't question it. Um, and so when you're going through these things, because the last thing you want to do is end up being too rigid, too structured, that you don't see times when there needs to be change. So I've fallen into this before where that okay, so for say for example, I tend not to get involved with office politics or gossip and stuff like that. I tend to focus on the stuff that I have to do. However, I wasn't very good at picking up some signs that the company that I was working for was about to go bankrupt. And I actually was so busy focusing on the projects and so structured in my routine that I was in my office, I was going through my project management list, and I was going through the things that needed to be done, and I was working on um, visiting how we could get we had some various tax structures. So we had Canadian tax structures, we had US tax structures, and it was to do with the logistics and the invoicing and stuff like that, and when to apply, when not to apply, and we were trying to figure out the coding for that. And I had to be able to explain the situation properly to the programmer so that they knew how to actually code the system to get it to do what it is that we needed to do. So first of all, I had to understand this from the US because I'm Canadian, so I didn't know any of those kind of things of what they needed, when to apply it, and in what circumstances to apply it. And we had all these different Incoterms and stuff that we had to deal with in third party freight forwarding kind of situations, right? So I had to learn all of those things, explain it to the programmer. And so I was going through the project list because my job was to be able to manage the project list, um, find out the information that the users needed, and then explain that to the programmers, test it, code it, and then roll out the training to the satellite offices. So that was part of my job. And so I had to interact with a bunch of different people trying to understand. So when I was dealing with the financial people, I had to put on my financial hat. And, when I was dealing with the programmers, I had to put on that. When I was dealing with the users, I had to put on these, a much more flexible, because they're more like the operators were more like the cowboys. It's like, no, I need to get this done no matter what, whether the system will let me do it or not. I'm going to figure out a way. And then, of course, I had the very structured financial people, the programmers, those kind of things. So I ended up learning how to have a foot in both worlds. And I think some of that came from growing up in a traumatic environment where I had to learn to become a chameleon and adapt to whatever situation was thrown at me. So this is why I say it's not always a bad thing to be able to learn these adaptive skills. I wouldn't recommend the way that I had to learn them. However, um, knowing that you are capable of putting on different hats, or showing different colors depending on the environment that you're in, and adapting to the particular environment that you're in. So in learning these things, I started to understand what was required, and I adapted in whatever situation, whoever is in front of me. And that is just a normal way of being for me. So that was something that is one of the blessings in disguise, if you choose to pull from that, right? So um, it can be easy to label somebody as they're not consistent, or they're people pleasing and everything. To me, I look at it as I can adapt and I can change to whatever environment I'm inserted in. And that makes for somebody that's pretty resilient, pretty strong. So it's not necessarily a bad thing when you are going through that kind of stuff. Now, um, if you get into a situation, you have to balance out, do I need more flexibility in this situation, or do I need more structure? And then learning how to manage that is where the challenge comes in, is understanding, did I go too far structured, or did I go too far flexible, right? And knowing which one is best and how to apply that in whatever situation that you're in. Um, so just trying to look. So yeah, for me, it depends on environment, the amount of resources, who else is actually involved in the situation, what kind of time constraints that I have to deal with to be able to get that done, and whatever budget constraints are in, right? So um, I have been, it's funny because some people will call me really rigid, really anal, no fun, stick in the mud kind of person. And then other people will look at me like she has no structure. She doesn't follow anything. She doesn't take this seriously. What the fuck? I am both. And I think all of us are both. We have the ability to be more than like we're multi-dimensional human beings, right? And and if you're not, that in and of itself is a problem, right? If you are too stuck in one way of being, you eventually will come up against a situation that will cause you a great deal of pain because you cannot flex and adapt to the situation. If you don't change, then if you're not changing, then it means you're not growing. And if you're not growing, then technically you are dying, right? So all of our cells will eventually replace themselves, right? And I'm not sure of the timing of it. I'm not going to even attempt to try and quote something, but I know I've heard people talk about those. Those kind of details have never been really important to me unless I'm actually looking at it and I need to use it for something. And then I will focus my attention on it because I can see a clear purpose of why I need that. Otherwise, there's only so much bandwidth we all have. There's only so much data processing that we're capable of as human beings. So you have to learn to know where to put the focus and what is most important. Now, as a survivor, a lot of times how we base that, how we filter that importance is based on the people around us. And usually we end up being last on the list, or we get to a point where we've just like, I've had it and I'm tired of being last on the list. And we go to this other extreme where we are first on the list. And that often was one of the things that I had to start to address when I was dealing with early recovery stuff. Of I often had these very polarizing ideas of I was either the best or the worst. There wasn't much in between. There wasn't much middle ground. There wasn't much gray area. So learning to identify what are the gray areas, in what areas am I very structured and disciplined in my approach, and what areas am I much more flexible on. And becoming aware of what that is. There's no right or wrong, okay? Um, it's just becoming aware of what that is for you and being comfortable and being okay that, you know what, in this area, I'm very structured. I have no flexibility. This has to be the way it is. And being able to communicate that to other people so that they understand where you're at, right? And it's a great example. So I had a friend. So I had a cake decorating business on the side. So I used to make all kinds of baked treats and then I bring them into the office. And it was really funny because I made this really great carrot cake and I put raisins in it. And a friend of mine, she didn't really she hated raisins in cakes or butter tarts or anything else like that. It was gross to her. She couldn't handle it. And but she would eat chocolate covered raisins, and I'd be like, make this make sense for me, right? And it for her it was more of a texture thing because the raisins when they were in a baked good they changed their texture and they're a little bit more snot like, which I can understand the repulsion of that. However, in chocolate covered raisins, they had a firmer texture and not so snot like, right? Um, so understanding that you can have the same thing and in different circumstances, one you're totally on board with, another you're like, hell no, get away, stay away, right? So um, and there'd be different things like that that would come up, and no different than have you ever had like you have your national brand and then your control brand. So I work for a grocery retailer, and we had the national brand. So these are the public brands that people are familiar with, like Coca-Cola, right? So say Coca-Cola or like Kraft, right? So I am very particular about peanut butter. I love my Kraft peanut butter. I love that stuff. Uh, Smooth, not crunchy, and not the light one. For whatever reason, the light version gives me my instant migraines. There's something they have in there that it no bueno. But the Kraft Smooth regular, favorite peanut butter. Try to give me a control brand. Uh-uh. There's certain things that we're okay with switching to the control brand or the store brand version of it, and we're like, it's no big deal, right? Uh, and other things we're like, hell no, it's got to be my particular brand. I'm not going to substitute. I'm not going to accept anything less than that, right? And you can have this with pharmaceuticals, you can have this with anything, right? Some people are like, no, it's got to be the brand name, it cannot be the generic. And so we have different preferences and tolerances for what we can handle in certain situations, what we're okay with, what we're not. Does that mean we're hypocrites or we're inauthentic or anything else like that? No, it just means the environment has changed or the circumstances have changed. And sometimes as we grow and adapt, Katie is singing in the background here. She's running around with her toy. This is what she does when it must be getting close to bedtime. Yes, it is. Hi, Katie. What you got? You got your toy? Hmm? Come say hi to everyone. Come on. Hi, baby. This is Katie. It's my baby girl. And so, as you're going along, it can be so easy to polarize one side or the other, right? And I think it is much more healing, much more beneficial when we are able to find the flexibility, the gray areas, know where our hard stops are, where our bottom lines are, where our non negotiables are, um, but also being willing to see and understand a different perspective, right? So while I may be very flexible, it's like, hey, um, if you invite me over or something like that, and you're like, just come over whenever. Be careful when you say that because if you do have some sort of idea of what kind of time you need me there for, clearly communicate that. Your version of just whenever is not my version of just whenever. I might show up like 2 hours late, 3 hours late, whatever, because it was like, hey, we're just coming over to hang. I didn't know that you were making a dinner. I didn't know that you had certain things or you had plans afterwards. Your version of whatever may not be my version of whatever, and this is where communication is important, right? Um, Same thing with me when I have people over. I will specifically tell them, whatever you do, you can come at this time, whatever time we set, but absolutely do not come early because I can promise you I will not be ready. I will be sliding in about 10 seconds before the due time, maybe probably more than likely a little bit late than anything. Um, and so I communicate that before because nothing will throw me off than somebody showing up early for an event that I have. Now, that being said, there are circumstances where if I know that there's something very time sensitive, important, that there's a bunch of people involved, this isn't just me and my friend hanging out, right? This is a bunch of people. I don't know how they're going to react in certain situations. I will show up like super early for something rather than risk being late. So I'm terrible at being able to uh, judge time. So I'm either really, really early or sliding in just under the wire or maybe a little bit late, right? So those kind of things end up happening. So if there's flexibility and you don't really like flexibility, then being clear, specific about what it is that you want will allow our interactions to go a lot smoother. than if you give me free range. Because I know, way back uh, in the day, I had a supervisor. She phrased something as an option, and it wasn't really an option, and it was more she was just trying to be nice at the way that she was giving a command, basically. So she was being polite about that, but I took it because of the way she phrased it as it was optional. And she got mad at it, and she's like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "Well, you said I could get to this when I got to this." And she's like, "No, I need this done now, and we have to get this done." Like, so from her perspective, she's assuming that I should know this because there were certain timelines for it, but I thought it was open ended. So it's really important to be clear when you're communicating exactly what it is that your expectations are, why you're doing that, and even with ourselves, being clear about why we are doing specific things. And like I said, when I break those routines and I pay attention to the emotions that come up for me afterwards, um, it's a good way for me to test, was I doing this because I thought it was important for somebody else and they needed it, or am I doing it for me? Because if I'm doing it for me, I know that I'm okay with if it's not perfect. But if I am panicked about changing something about it, then I know I was doing it for somebody else, right? So this is one of the indicators that I use to make sure that I'm on the right track, that I am truly doing this as something that I want to do compared to this is something that I'm doing because I think others want me to do. And that was one of the biggest things that I have experienced and had to challenge why I do certain things as I'm going along, right? And for some reason, this example is coming up, so I'm going to share this. As I had a friend of mine, she told me that because she would try to build me up, and she'd give me positive affirmations and encouragement and stuff like that. And whenever she said something, I always counteracted with why that wasn't true. And, yeah, but I do this, and this is wrong, and this is wrong, and this is wrong, and all these different things. And, Katie, I love you. And she ended up getting frustrated with me and saying, "You know what, Tina, you're perfect at one thing, and that's being really hard on yourself." And I remember it like really took me back, and I was like, "What? You think I'm being hard on myself?" Like, I felt like I wasn't being hard enough on myself. And what I had come to realize is that I was really, at that time, I was extremely uncomfortable with getting any praise or any attention. And that was a trauma response because that ended up causing more problems. If I got any attention, any praise, anything that I did right, then that ended up causing a whole bunch of jealousy, resentment, uh, criticisms that would come from outside of like, "Oh, you think you're so good, you think you're so smart," any of those kind of things that would kind of come up. And so it was really a panic thing of, it wasn't that I was trying to be perfect or that I thought I was being hard on myself. I was really just trying to deflect any attention being put on me because of fear of punishment, uh, fear of retaliation, fear of jealousy and resentments and stuff like that. Um, and so when that was said, I had to start to learn to recognize, first of all, that I was even doing that because these were such automatic responses that kicked in as protection mechanisms before I even realized. So the first step was becoming aware of it, when it was happening, why it was happening, and then also starting to become, through practice, becoming comfortable with accepting positive feedback. Um, so, one of the things that I started doing when I was learning this is because people would give me a compliment of something, and it was such an automatic response to say, "Oh, it's not that big of a deal," or "It's no, so and so did better than me," or like I would always try and push that off to something else, somebody else. Don't put the attention on me. I did not want that attention for obvious reasons of being sexually abused and all that kind of stuff. Getting attention was not a good thing. So I always tried to hide in the background. So just even doing this is huge recovery steps of being able to come on here, talk about the things that I've been through, and sharing that kind of stuff. I did not want that kind of attention. I was fine with helping people, but I did not want the attention put on me in any way, shape, or form. And so when I first started, what I would do is I had to stop myself from counteracting that of why it wasn't true by just learning to shut up and say thank you. Um, like if somebody said, "Oh, I really like that top that you're wearing." "Oh, this old thing. Oh, I got it. Like, I got it as a discount. I got it on sale, blah, 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 blah." Like, I always had to minimize what I had, what I had to show for things, what I was doing, any of that kind of stuff. I always felt the need to put that stuff down. And probably as a protection mechanism, a coping mechanism, as I'm talking about this, is that if I put myself down first, then they didn't feel the need to bring me down a peg or two, kind of thing. Um, so learning to accept compliments, learning to accept it without counteracting why that wasn't true, um, was a big step in the recovery healing process for me. And learning to sit with that and be comfortable with it when somebody gave me a compliment is something that I still work at these days, but now I'm much better at of just saying thank you and appreciating it and not pointing, and I still have this urge to point out yeah, but it wasn't that big a deal. Like, I when I was doing cake decorating, people would say, "Oh, it was really good cake," and I point out all the things that were wrong with the cake, and they'd be like, "What are you talking about?" Right? To them it's freaking amazing. To me, I'm like, "Well, I made all these mistakes, and can't you see that this doesn't line up quite right here," and all this kind of stuff. And they saw me as a perfectionist, and it was really not that I was trying to be perfect, is I wasn't comfortable with compliments. And so learning the difference was a huge step in recovery. So hopefully that was helpful to you guys. If you are jumping in partway through and want to catch the replay, I will be uploading this to my YouTube channel, which is Coach Tina B 125. Um, and if you have any questions, comments, concerns, or things that you are struggling with in terms of sadness, depression, anxiety, any tough emotions, any of those kind of things that you would like me to do a training on, let me know and I'll create a training for us to go through this. And I thought this one was a good one because while some people can label, you being a chameleon as a problem, it is actually a very adaptive skill that survivors end up developing as a way to cope with the situations that they've been through, and then learning how to tap into that skill as a gift in your adult life, in your career, in your relationships, and use it to your benefit. Not in a manipulative way, but in an adaptive way, and always understanding the why behind why you're doing it. Because if you're doing it for somebody else's approval or attention, or to deflect that attention, those are signals that you need to do some inner work there, and you need to um, look at that stuff, not because it's bad, one side or the other is bad, but so that you can look at it, so that you can actually choose when you're doing it, that you use those things as tools, as adaptive situations, rather than them being things that you're constantly reacting to, that you don't really have a control over. And I think that's where the important thing is, of when you're doing that inner work, then you can make a conscious decision rather than a reactive decision that you maybe developed from childhood. And then you can choose whether or not this tool is actually the right tool for the job, or if there's a better solution that you can implement. So, guys, I hope that was helpful. Again, I'll be on again tomorrow night. I think I'm going to stick with the 11 p.m. Start times, Eastern Standard Time, just so that now, if there's anybody that has been watching and they're like, no, Tina, I want you to go back to the 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, let me know that as well, so that I can adjust. But I'm thinking with the nicer weather that's going to be coming here, although today was fairly cold, but the nicer weather, I probably want to do more of an evening one, because I know come beach time, sunsets, 9 p.m. Eastern is prime time for the sunset. So I'm looking forward to those because they're beautiful around this area. So anyway, guys, hope you have a great night, and we will talk to you again tomorrow. Bye.